The new lad flinches from the light, the Duke of Calderwood said, and the whole stable went still. He stood in the wide doorway with the morning behind him, and the boy at the far stall had frozen with a currycomb half raised, shoulders drawn up as though a blow were coming. It was a small thing. It should have meant nothing to a man who owned 400 horses and the fields they grazed. Yet Gideon Ravenscar, 9th Duke of Calderwood, master of Harrogate and everything the eye could reach from its towers, felt the small thing catching him like a splinter and refused to come loose. "Your Grace," said Coombe, the head groom, snatching off his cap. "The lad's new to it. Green as spring. He'll settle. See that he does." Gideon did not move from the doorway. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, and he had learned long ago that stillness unsettled people more than shouting ever could. He used it now, deliberately, the way another man might use a whip, not from cruelty, from habit. From the long years of teaching himself that a duke who showed nothing could be wounded by no one. The boy had not turned around. That was the second small thing. Every other lad in the yard had bowed or bobbed, or at the very least gawped at the sight of the master come down to the stalls before breakfast. This one kept his back to the door and his face to the horse, and the line of that back was too straight, too careful, as if holding a posture cost him effort. "You," Gideon said. "Boy, come here." For a moment nothing happened. Then the currycomb was set down on the ledge with a click, and the lad came out from the stall, and Gideon watched him cross the straw-strewn floor with his cap pulled low and his chin tucked and his eyes on the ground. Slight. Too slight for the heavy work, though the arms that showed below rolled sleeves were browned and not soft. He stopped a careful distance away and stood and did not look up. "Look at me when I speak to you," Gideon said. The boy looked up. It was a plain face, sun-browned across the nose, a smudge of dirt along one cheekbone, hair cropped short and none too evenly under the cap, a servant's face. There were 1,000 such faces on his lands, and Gideon had learned the trick of not seeing them, because a man could not carry the weight of 1,000 faces and still stand upright, but he saw this one. He did not know why. There was something in the eyes, grey, wide-set, steady in a way that a frightened stable lad's eyes had no business being, that did not match the flinch, did not match the tucked chin, did not match the pulled low. The eyes looked back at him as though from a great and level distance, and for the length of one breath the Duke of Calderwood had the sensation of being measured by someone who had every right to measure him. Then the boy dropped his gaze again, and the moment was gone, and Gideon told himself he had imagined it. "What is your name?" "Robin, your Grace." The voice was low, rough and pitched down as though the lad had a cold, or had been taught to keep it down. "Robin Ash." "How long have you been here, Robin Ash?" 6 weeks come Sunday, your Grace." "And do you like it here?" A pause, the smallest pause. "It's a good place, your Grace. The horses are well kept and the men are fair." Careful words, servant's words, the safe answer a boy gave the master. And yet, Gideon had spent 39 years among people who told him what he wished to hear, and he had grown a fine ear for the difference between a lie and an evasion, and this was neither. It was true. It was carefully, precisely true, and it answered a different question than the one he had asked. He had asked whether the boy liked it here. The boy had told him the place was good. Those were not the same, and only a person very used to guarding their words would have known to keep them apart. "That will do," Gideon said, and turned, and walked out into the cold gold of the morning, and did not look back, and thought about the grey eyes all the way up the long gravel to the house. He told himself it was nothing. He had a great deal to think about that was not stable lads. There was the matter of the north drainage, and the tenants at Ferrers who could not pay, and above all there was the letter that had come 3 days ago, and lay still unanswered on the desk in his study, the letter from his aunt, the Dowager Countess of Marle, informing him with her usual iron sweetness that it was past time he married, that she had drawn up a list, that the season would bring the eligible daughters of half the peerage within his reach, if he would only trouble himself to reach, and that she would be arriving at Harrogate within the month to see the business properly begun whether he willed it or no. Gideon had read the letter twice and set it down and not touched it since. He was 39. His father had married at 39, a cold, clean transaction of estates and bloodlines, had died at 50 a bitter man in a loveless house, and Gideon had watched the whole slow ruin of it from the corner of a nursery and sworn a boy's furious oath that he would not repeat it. He had kept the oath by the simple method of not marrying at all, but he was 39 and Calderwood had no hair, and the aunt was coming, and the letter lay on the desk like a debt. So he had more than enough to occupy him, and no reason on earth to be thinking of a slight boy with grey eyes in the stable. And yet he thought of him, and could not have said why, except that the thought was not unpleasant, and that was itself a strange enough thing that he noticed it. The truth, though Gideon did not know it and would not know it for many weeks, was this: the boy called Robin Ash was not a boy at all. Her name was Eleanor Vane, and 47 days ago she had been Miss Eleanor Vane of Thornfield Grange, the only child of a gentleman lately dead and a mother longer dead than that, and heiress of a modest fortune and a still more modest freedom, which is to say none. 48 days ago she had been informed by her guardian and uncle Sir Roderick Vane that she was to marry Mr. Hollis Crane. 49 days ago she had not known that such a man as Hollis Crane existed, and had been happier for it. She had met him once before the thing was decided. That had been enough. He was a heavy man of 50 with damp hands and a habit of standing too close, a man who had buried 2 wives already and spoken of them the way a farmer speaks of livestock that had failed to thrive. He had looked at Eleanor the way he might have looked at a mare at a fair, at her teeth very nearly, at her hips certainly, and he had told her uncle across her own dinner table that she would answer well enough once the spirit was walked out of her, and her uncle had laughed. And Eleanor had understood, sitting there with a fork in her hand and the candlelight swimming, that no one in the world would help her, because the world had been arranged for men like her uncle and men like Hollis Crane. And a girl of 22 with a fortune and no father was not a person in that world, but a parcel to be handed across a table and signed for. She had a little money her father had left in her own name, enough to keep her alive for a season if she was careful. She had a nurse, old Mercy, who loved her and who had a cousin in service 2 counties north. And she had, it turned out, a great deal more nerve than anyone had ever thought to look for in her, because the daughters of gentlemen were not supposed to have nerve, only accomplishments, and Eleanor had been careful all her life to seem to have only accomplishments. She had cut off her hair with the sewing shears by candlelight, weeping the whole time, not for vanity, but because the hair had been her mother's colour, and it was the last thing of her mother she had. She had put on the clothes Mercy's cousin had sent, a dead boy's clothes, God rest him, a farm lad carried off by fever, his shirts and breeches and heavy boots. She had rubbed dirt into the creases of her knuckles and walnut stain into her face, and had practised, night after night, pitching her voice down and slouching her straight taut spine and walking with her feet turned out, until the mirror showed her a stranger, a plain rough boy, and she had looked at the stranger and felt, for the first time in 49 days, something that was almost like hope. The name of the estate had been Mercy's idea. Calderwood was 3 counties from Thornfield, a great remote holding under a duke famously cold and famously private, a man who kept to himself and did not go into society and did not, above all, know the Vanes or the Cranes or anyone who knew them. A duke's stables were vast. A duke's household was so large that a single new lad among the grooms would be no more remarked than a single new starling in a flock. She had gone to Coombe the head groom with a story of a farm gone under and a family scattered, and Coombe, who was short-handed and did not much care for the histories of boys so long as they were sober and rose early, had taken her on to muck stalls and carry water and learn the horses, at wages that would have insulted a scullery maid, and that were, Eleanor, the price of her freedom, and cheap. For 6 weeks it had worked. For 6 weeks she had been Robin Ash, and she had slept in the loft over the tack room among 4 other lads and risen in the black cold before dawn and worked until her hands bled and blistered and then calloused. And she had been so tired every night that she did not dream, and that was a mercy too, because when she dreamed of Hollis Crane's damp hands. She had learned to fork straw and to plait a mane and to stand at a great horse's shoulder without fear. She had learned to keep her eyes down and her voice low and to say little. She had learned that a boy who worked hard and asked for nothing became, very quickly, invisible, which was exactly what she wanted, invisibility being the nearest thing to safety that the world had on offer. And then, on the 47th morning, the Duke had come down to the stables before breakfast, and stood in the doorway and looked at her, and she had felt his gaze land on her the way you feel a hand on the back of your neck, and she had known, cold to the bone, that she had been seen. She had not meant to flinch. The flinch had been years of training, the reflex of a girl taught to shrink from the notice of powerful men. But he had marked it. She had heard him mark it, heard the very words, "The new lad flinches from the light," and she had stood with the currycomb in her hand and her heart going like a hare's and thought, with a despair that steadied her strangely, so it ends here then, but had not ended. He had asked her name and her time and whether she liked it, and she had answered as carefully as she knew how, and he had said that will do and walked away. She had watched him go up the gravel, tall and dark against the pale sky, and she had let out a breath she had been holding so long it hurt, and she had thought, I must be more careful. I must be less than I am. I must be nothing at all. She did not know that being nothing at all was precisely the thing that the Duke of Calderwood had spent his whole life doing, and that he had recognized it in her the way one exile recognizes another across a foreign room. Up at the house, Gideon answered no letters that day. He stood at the tall window of his study and watched the stable yard far below, a small ordered world of men and horses and steam rising off warm flanks in the cold, and he told himself he was thinking about the north drainage. He was not thinking about the north drainage. He was thinking that when the boy Robin Ash had looked up at him and answered, the boy's hands had been wrong, browned and blistered and worked hard, yes, but the fingers were long and fine, and the way they had set the currycomb down on the ledge had been quick and neat and oddly precise. The hands of someone who had once been taught to play, or to draw, or to write a fair hand, and not the hands of a farm boy at all. It was nothing. He knew it was nothing. Boys came from everywhere, from all kinds of ruin. A gently born child fallen on hard times was no rare thing in a hard age. Half the servants in England had a story if you cared to dig, and Gideon did not as a rule care to dig. He had trained himself out of curiosity along with everything else. Curiosity was a form of hope, and hope, in his experience, was simply the long way round to disappointment. And yet he found, as the short winter day drew down and the lamps were lit and the fire built up in the great cold rooms, that he was curious. He had not been curious about anything in a long time. It felt, against all sense, like the first thin crack of thaw in a country that had been frozen so long it had forgotten there was any other way to be. He went down to the stables again the next morning. He told himself it was to see the grey colt that had strained a tendon. He stood a long time in the aisle watching Coombe walk the colt out, and the whole time at the edge of his sight. The slight figure of Robin Ash moved among the stalls, filling water, forking straw, keeping his cap low and his eyes down, keeping, so carefully, so studiously, out of the great man's way. And Gideon, who had come down to look at a horse, found that he was watching the boy instead, and that he did not entirely wish to stop. The winter deepened, and the Duke of Calderwood, who had for years measured his days by rent rolls and ledgers and the slow cold rituals of a great house, began to measure them by something else, though he would not for a long time admit it even to himself. He found excuses. That was the first sign, and he was too honest a man not to see it eventually, though at first he refused to. He rode out every clear morning now, when for years he had ridden perhaps twice a week. And he took to bringing his own horse back to the stables himself rather than leaving it to the grooms in the yard, and each time it was the slight lad Robin Ash who came to take the reins, because Coombe had noticed the master's odd new interest and had, with the shrewdness of a man who had served 3 dukes, assigned the boy to the master's own stallion. And so morning after morning Gideon dismounted in the cold and handed his reins to a pair of long fine hands, and said a word or two, and watched and learned. He learned that the boy was afraid of him. That much was plain, and it displeased him in a way he did not examine, because Gideon was used to being feared and had thought himself indifferent to it. But the fear was of a particular kind. It was not the honest animal fear of a servant who had done wrong, nor the awe of a low man before a great one. It was watchful. It was the fear of someone who was hiding something and expected, at every moment, to have it found. Gideon knew that fear intimately. He had worn it himself as a boy in his father's house, the fear of a child who has learned that showing what he loved was the surest way to have it taken from him, and so had learned to love nothing where his father could see. He learned that the boy was clever. This came out sideways, the way true things do. One raw morning a horse copper had come up from the town to sell Coombe Bay gelding, and the man had talked fast and smooth, and Coombe, an honest fellow but no scholar, had been half won over when Gideon, standing by in the shadow of the barn, had heard the lad Robin say very low to another groom, not meaning to be heard, that the bay was short in the pastern, and would go lame on hard ground inside a 12-month, and had named the fault so exactly that Gideon had stepped forward and refused the horse on the spot, and watched the coper's face fall, and watched the boy go white and busy himself with a bucket as though he wished the ground would take him. A farm lad might know a horse. A farm lad did not name a confirmation fault in the clipped precise words of a man who had read about it in a book. He learned that the boy did not eat with the other lads. Coombe let this slip in passing. The men had begun to grumble that Robin Ash gave himself airs, took his bread and cheese off to a corner alone, never joined the singing, never took a mug of the small beer, kept to himself in the loft, and put a screen of hung sacking round his corner of the straw. Coombe thought it shyness. Gideon thought it something else, and the something else troubled him, because he could think of no good reason a boy should so guard his own body from the eyes of other boys, and several reasons that were not good at all: cruelty done to him, a shame he carried, a hurt he hid. Gideon, who had spent his life not caring, found himself caring, and the caring had a raw new edge to it that he did not know what to do with. It was in the 3rd week of watching that he began to be certain, though he could not yet have said certain of what. There had been a hard frost, and the water in the troughs had frozen through, and the whole yard was out breaking ice and carrying steaming buckets from the house, and in the general labour Gideon had come down himself, because he could not sit still in the house with the aunt's 2nd letter now on the desk beside the first, and he had taken up an axe and broken ice alongside his own men, which he did sometimes to their alarm, when the black mood was on him and only work would answer it. And in the thick of it a great cart horse, a placid old giant called Samson, had taken fright at something. A slate come loose off the roof, a bird, nothing, and had reared and come down and bolted, plunging across the frozen yard with its iron shoes skating and sparking, straight at the corner where the lad Robin Ash stood with a full bucket, trapped against the wall. Gideon shouted. Every man in the yard shouted, and in the half-second before the horse was on him, the boy did not freeze and did not run. He dropped the bucket, and he stepped not back against the wall but forward and sideways, in under the horse's swinging head. And he caught the flying rein close by the bit, and turned with the horse's plunge instead of against it, and spoke. Gideon saw the lips move, though he could not hear the words over the din, and the great terrified animal, feeling the steady hand and the low steady voice, checked and shuddered, and stood, blowing, trembling, its nose down against the slight figure that had not been trampled into the frozen mud only because it had known, precisely and without hesitation, exactly what to do. The yard erupted. The men crowded round, half in praise and half in fright, and Coombe was bellowing, and old Samson stood shaking with the boy's hand flat on its neck, and Gideon stood 10 feet off with the ice axe forgotten in his hand and his heart, to his own astonishment, slamming against his ribs. Because that was not a thing a green lad 6 weeks on the job could do. That was horsemanship of a high and bred kind, the cool nerve and the schooled hands and the instinct that came only from years in the saddle from earliest childhood, the way the children of the great were taught to ride almost before they could walk. Farm boys were bold with cart horses because they knew no better. This was different. This was someone who had been on a horse's back since infancy, who had hunted very likely, who had been taught by a master, and who had, in the moment of danger, forgotten to be Robin Ash and been, for 3 seconds, entirely themselves, quick, fearless, finely trained, and utterly out of place in a duke's stableyard. Gideon crossed the yard. The boy saw him coming, and Gideon watched the transformation happen in reverse, watched the bred creature fold itself back down into the cowering lad. The shoulders rounding, the chin dropping, the eyes going to the ground, and the sight of it did something painful to him, some twist under the breastbone he had no name for. "Are you hurt?" Gideon said. It was not quite a question. "No, your grace." Rough. The eyes down. "Where did you learn to do that?" A silence. The yard had gone quiet around them. The men were listening. The The boy's hand was still on the horse's neck, and Gideon saw the hand was shaking now in the aftermath, though the voice, when it came, was level. "My father kept horses, your grace. Before we lost the place, I was raised among them. Kept horses. A farmer kept horses. A gentleman was raised among them." The boy had chosen his words again with that same terrible care, a truth cut precisely to hide a truth. And Gideon looked down at the bent dirty head and the trembling fine hand and the grey eyes that would not meet his, and he knew, not suspected now, knew, with the cold total certainty that a man of his sort arrives at all at once and does not afterward doubt, that the creature standing before him in a dead boy's boots was no boy at all. He could not have said how he knew. The knowledge was under the words, under the disguise, in the set of the wrists and the line of the throat and the thing behind the eyes. He knew. And in the same instant, before he had even finished knowing it, Gideon Ravenscar, 9th Duke of Calderwood, did a thing that surprised him more than anything had surprised him in 20 years. He decided to say nothing. He did not know why. Later he would tell himself it had been prudence, that a wise man does not tear the veil off a mystery in a crowded yard with his own men watching. But that was not it, or not all of it. The truth, which he glimpsed and shied from and would not look at squarely for a long while yet, was that he had seen, in the 3 seconds the boy had forgotten to hide, a whole person of grace and courage and fear, a person in flight from something, a person who had wrapped herself in dirt and boy's clothes and a false rough voice for one reason only, which was survival. And that some old buried part of Gideon, the part that had been a frightened child in a cold house, knew exactly what it was to hide in order to live, and would not be the hand that dragged this one out into the light against her will. So he said, "You did well. Better than my grooms, most of them, would have done. See the horse settled and then get yourself something hot. You've had a fright." And he turned and walked away and left the yard buzzing behind him and went up to the house and sat in his study before the fire for a long time, not reading, not writing, thinking about a pair of grey eyes and a truth he had chosen, deliberately, to leave alone. Down in the stable, Eleanor Vane stood with her hand on Samson's warm, shuddering neck long after the men had gone back to their work, and she felt as though she might be sick. She had betrayed herself. She knew it the instant her hands closed on the rein, knew it and could not have done otherwise, because there had been no time to think, only the horse coming and the old sure knowledge rising up through her arms of its own accord, the knowledge her father had given her on a fat pony in a green paddock when she was 4 years old, laughing, his hands over her small hands on the reins, saying gently, "Feel him, Nell, don't fight him, feel him." She had felt Samson and turned with him and saved herself, and in saving herself she had shown the Duke of Calderwood exactly the thing she had spent 7 weeks hiding, which was that she was not what she seemed. She had seen him know it. She was sure of it. She had looked up into the dark, still face and seen behind the stillness a swift certainty arrive, and she had waited in that endless moment for the words that would end her, for "Take off your cap," or "Who are you really?" or "Send for the magistrate." And instead he had said "You did well," and told her to get something hot and walked away, and she did not understand it, and not understanding it frightened her more than exposure would have, because why would he say nothing? A man like that, Duke, cold and remote. A man who owed her nothing, and to whom she was less than nothing, a fraud in his household, an unmarried gentlewoman masquerading among his servants, a scandal, a thing to be handed to the law or handed back to the family that would pay to have her found. Why would such a man look straight at the truth of her, and then turn and walk away and leave her standing? She lay awake in the loft that night behind her screen of sacking, listening to the other lads breathe, and she turned it over and over. Perhaps he had not truly seen. Perhaps she had imagined the knowing in his face. Perhaps he thought only that she was a runaway apprentice or a gently born boy come down in the world, which was near enough the truth to be safe. She tried to believe that. She could not quite believe it. She had looked into his eyes and something had passed between them, some current, and it had not felt like a master looking at a servant. It had felt, and here she pressed her cold hands over her face in the dark and made herself stop the thought, because it was a dangerous thought and led nowhere she could go. It had felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Someone had looked at Eleanor Vane and seen a person, and the person he had seen was hunted and hiding and afraid, and he had not flinched from it or used it, but had, with a single quiet sentence, set a hand between her and the danger and stepped back. She did not sleep much. But toward morning, worn out, she did sleep, and for once she did not dream of Hollis Crane's damp hands. She dreamed instead, absurdly, of a green paddock and a fat pony and her father's laugh, and of a tall, dark stranger standing at the paddock rail watching her ride. And though in the dream she could not see the stranger's face, she knew, the way you know things in dreams, that he was smiling, and that he meant her no harm, and she woke in the cold black loft with her face wet, and did not know, for a long moment, whether from grief or from something she had no name for and no right to feel. Up at the house the Duke of Calderwood was already awake. He had not slept either. He stood at his study window in the last of the dark and watched the first lamp bloom in the stayboard far below, and he thought, with a strange grim tenderness that was entirely new to him and that he distrusted completely, "I will watch over you, then. I will watch, and I will say nothing, and I will keep you safe in my own house until you are ready to tell me who you are, or until I understand what you are running from, and can put myself between you and it." He did not ask himself why a duke should trouble to shield a runaway stranger who had come to him under a lie. He was afraid a little of the answer. So he did not ask, and instead he rang for his coffee, and answered at last his aunt's 2 waiting letters, briefly, coldly, buying time, saying only that he would receive her when she came, but that the matter of his marriage was his own, and would be decided in his own way and in no other. And having sealed it, he sat a while longer, and watched the dawn come up grey and gold over his stables, and felt, for no reason he would allow, more alive than he had felt in 20 years. There was a morning in the 4th week when the thaw came, brief and treacherous, and the moor lay under a low pearl mist, and Gideon rode out with the boy Robin Ash into a world without edges, the two of them moving through wet grey air that muffled the horses' hooves to nothing, and it seemed to Gideon, that morning, that they had ridden clean out of the ordinary world, into some place where the usual rules had no force. He had, by then, given up the pretense that he rode for the horses. He rode for the company. He knew it and did not fight it, and the knowing had a peace in it, for a man who has spent his whole life fighting every soft thing in himself finds, when at last he stops, that the stopping is not weakness but rest. So he let the horses walk that misty morning, and he did not fill the silence. And after a while the boy beside him began, hesitantly, to talk of nothing, of the moor, of a heron they had put up from a beck, of the way the mist made the familiar hills strange, and Gideon listened, and answered a little, and drew the boy out with a care so until it would have astonished the men who trembled at his frown. He learned things that morning that he stored away like a miser, that the boy's mother was dead, long dead, a grief gone quiet and deep, that the boy had loved his father past telling and lost him in the spring, and that the loss was raw still, and that when he spoke of it his low, rough voice went lower still, and he looked away across the mist. That there had been a house, once a home, warm and full of books and music, and that the boy did not speak of what had become of it, but that the not speaking said everything. Gideon gathered each fragment and turned it over privately and fitted it to the picture he was building of the person hidden inside the disguise, and the picture grew, and the more it grew the more it grieved and enraged him, for it was the picture of a gently reared soul robbed of everything. Home, name, family, safety, even the freedom to weep in daylight, and driven to hide in a stranger's stable in a dead lad's boots as the last shift of a hunted creature that would not lie down and be taken. "Do you mean to stay a groom your whole life, Robin Ash?" he asked, once carefully watching the mist. He felt rather than saw the boy go still beside him. "I mean to stay alive, your grace," the boy said at last, very low. "The rest I have not the luxury to plan." It was the truest thing the boy had ever said to him and the barest, and it went into Gideon and lodged there. "I mean to stay alive. The rest I have not the luxury to plan." He thought of it for days. He thought of all the plans he himself had made across the cold, empty years. The drainage and the rents and the careful defended solitude, and how they were the plans of a man so safe he had grown bored of his own safety, and how here beside him rode a creature to whom mere survival was still a daily labor and a daily triumph, and he felt ashamed, obscurely, of every comfort he had ever taken for granted, and he resolved, without yet knowing how, that he would make this person safe enough, one day, to have the luxury of a plan. The mist burned off toward noon, and they turned for home, and cresting the last rise, Gideon reined in for a moment, as he often did, to look down on Harrogate lying grey and vast in its park, towers, the long roofs, the smoke of 100 fires going up straight in the still air. He had never much liked the sight of it. It was his father's house, cold and proud, and it had always seemed to him more a monument than a home. But that morning, with the boy beside him, he looked down at it and thought, unbidden, it could be warm. It could be a warm place. And he was so startled by the thought that the grey mausoleum of his childhood might, under some other hand, become a place a person could be happy in, that he said nothing at all the rest of the way down, and the boy, respecting his silence, said nothing either. And they came into the yard together in the thin winter sun and parted without a word, and Gideon carried the thought up to the house and could not put it down. It could be warm. He knew even then, though he would not let himself frame it plainly, whose hand it was he imagined making it so. There was another morning, later harder, when he learned how deep the fear ran. A carriage had come up the avenue unexpected, only a neighbour, Mr. Fenwick, come about a boundary hedge, nothing at all. But Gideon had been in the yard when it appeared at the head of the drive, and he had seen the boy Robin Ash, at the first glint of coach wheels between the trees, go white and drop the halter he held and back into the shadow of the barn with the swift silent instinct of a hunted animal gone to ground, pressed flat to the wall, eyes fixed on the coach, ready to run. It was only Fenwick. Gideon had known it was only Fenwick, but he had seen the terror, seen how near the surface it lived, how a mere carriage on the drive could turn a brave, clever soul in an instant back into pure prey, and he had understood then, wholly, that whatever was hunting this person was not a thing to be reasoned with or waited out, but a real and near and closing danger, and that the calm of the last weeks was a borrowed calm, an eye of a storm, and that the storm was still out there, turning, coming on. He had gone to the boy afterward, when Fenwick was gone, and found him still shaken, and had said only quietly, so the others should not hear, it was a neighbour, no one who means you any harm. You are safe here, Robin Ash. Whatever it is you watch the road for, while you are under my roof, it does not come through my gate. You have my word on it. And he had watched the grey eyes come up to his, wide and wet and disbelieving and wanting, so badly to believe. And he had held that look steadily and let the boy read in his face that he meant it every word, and he had seen the shoulders come down a fraction, the breath go out, the raw fear ebb, and it was in that moment, he thought afterward, more even than on the day of the frost, that he had crossed the last line in himself, and known past any unknowing that he would keep that word or die keeping it. He did not sleep well after that. He lay awake in the great cold ducal bed, and thought about the road, and about who might be on it, and about the law, which he already suspected would not be on his side, and about the fact that a duke, for all his 400 horses and his towers and his fortune, could not simply declare a hunted stranger safe and make it so, not against a determined enemy with the law's own machinery at his back. He thought about all the ways it'd go wrong, and he thought this was the new thing, the thing that had never once troubled his ordered defended knights before. He thought about how unbearable it had become to imagine the boy taken away, carried back down that avenue into whatever waited, gone out of his life into danger, and himself left behind in the warm, safe house able to do nothing. The imagining of it was a physical pain, sharp under the breastbone, and Gideon lay in the dark and pressed his hand against the place and understood, with a kind of grim wonder, that he had gone and done the very thing his whole life had been built to prevent. He had let something in. He had let something all the way in, so far in that its loss would maim him, and there was no getting it out again. This was the strangest part, the part he turned over and over in the dark. He found he did not want to. He would rather bear the terror of loving than go back to the safe grey nothing he had called peace. Better to breathe and fear, he thought, than never to have breathed at all. And somewhere in the dark he half smiled at himself, for the phrase had come to him in the boy's stolen Latin, dum spiro spiro, and he thought, I have caught it from you, whoever you are. You have taught me to hope, and I did not even ask your leave. In the morning he rose before the servants, as had become his habit, and stood at the study window in the last of the dark, and watched the first lamp bloom in the stable yard far below, that small warm gold light in the vast cold blue of the winter dawn, and he watched a slight familiar figure cross the yard toward it, cap low, shoulders careful, going to the day's first labor, and he thought, with a tenderness that had stopped frightening him, there you are. And he stood and watched until the figure had gone into the warm lit stable and the door had closed, and then he rang for his coffee and began quietly to make inquiries into the law of guardianship, into what a determined man might do to shield another from it, into every door that might yet be opened. For he had given his word that no harm would come through his gate, and the Duke of Calderwood, whatever else was said of him in 3 cold counties, had never in his life broken his word, and did not mean to begin with the only word that had ever truly mattered. After the day of the frost, the Duke of Calderwood found reasons to keep the lad Robin Ash near him, and the reasons grew flimsier and the keeping grew more open, until Coombe and the grooms had all quietly understood that the strange remote master had, for whatever unfathomable reason, taken a fancy to the slight new boy, and they let it be, because the ways of dukes were not to be questioned, and because the boy, whatever his airs, was the best hand with a nervous horse any of them had ever seen. Gideon told himself he was studying the mystery. He told himself, a puzzle in his house, and a man might reasonably wish to solve a puzzle. So he had the boy attend him when he rode out, and he took to riding out further and longer, up onto the high moor above Harrogate where the wind scoured the world clean. And the two of them would ride for miles with hardly a word, the great house dwindling behind them, and Gideon found that the silence between them was not the empty silence he kept with other people, but a full one, a companionable one, and that he had not shared a companionable silence with any living soul since his mother died when he was 9. He learned more riding. He learned that the boy rode like a centaur when he forgot himself, and remembered to slump and jog awkwardly when he recalled that he must, and Gideon pretended not to see the difference. He learned that the boy knew the names of the wild birds and the moor flowers, and once, coming on a ruined shepherd's cot with an old carved date stone above the lintel, had read the worn Latin motto aloud without thinking, Dum spiro spiro, while I breathe, I hope, in an accent of perfect gentility, and had then gone rigid with the horror of what he had let slip. And Gideon had ridden on as though he had heard nothing, though the words went into him and stayed, while I breathe, I hope. It was, he thought, a strange motto for a hunted creature to carry, and a brave one, and he learned most of all and most dangerously that he was happy, crept up on him. He did not recognize it at first, having so little to compare it to. He knew only that the mornings had begun to matter, that he woke wanting the day, that the long grey rides that had once been a duty were now the best part of everything, and that when rain kept them in he was short-tempered and restless in a way his household remarked upon with alarm. Once, cresting the moor with the whole shining country spread below, and the lad beside him laughing, actually laughing, forgetting to be careful, at some clumsy leap Gideon's stallion had made over a beck. Gideon had turned and seen the laughing face, sun on it, the grey eyes bright and unguarded, the cap for once knocked back, and he had felt something turn over in his chest so hard it frightened him, and he had looked away quickly and ridden on and been curt for the rest of the day, because he had understood in that instant the shape of the thing he had been refusing to name. He was in love. He, Gideon Ravenscar, who had built his whole life into a fortress against exactly this, who had watched love make a wreck of his father and vowed never to give it purchase in himself. He had fallen, helplessly and completely, in love with a person who wore boy's clothes and lived in his stable and had told him nothing but lies, and whose true name and true face and true self he had never once seen. It was absurd. It was, on the face of it, monstrous. He turned it over in the cold, reasonable part of his mind, and found it did not yield to reason at all. He did not love the disguise. He loved the person under it, the courage, the guarded gentle wit, the fear so bravely carried, the grace that broke through in unguarded moments like sun through cloud. He loved a soul he had recognized through a costume, and he would have known that soul, he thought, in any dress at all. And the costume was nothing but a wall between them, a wall the person had built out of terror, and Gideon wanted, with a fierceness that shook him, to take that wall stone by stone, not to expose her, God forbid, but to free her, so that she need never be afraid again. He knew now past all doubting that Robin Ash was a woman. He had known it, really, since the day of the frost. But knowing it as a fact and letting himself feel it as a truth were different things, and the second had cost him a struggle. because a decent man did not think of his stable lad as a woman, and Gideon was, under all the ice, a decent man. He had wrestled it out on the high moor over many cold rides, and he had come to this, that she had not made herself a woman for his benefit or to deceive his heart, but had made herself a boy to save her life. That whatever she was fleeing was so terrible that a gentlewoman had chosen dirt and hard labor, and the loss of her very name over facing it, and that the only honorable thing a man in his position could do was to make his house a sanctuary and ask nothing and wait. He would not touch her. He would not speak of it. He would not, above all, use his power over her. She who was so wholly in his power, a fraud in his household who could be undone by a word from him, to press for anything at all. He would simply keep her safe, and love her in silence, and if she never told him the truth, then he would carry the secret to his grave and count himself on the balance, a fortunate man for having known her at all. It was, he thought grimly, the first entirely selfless thing he had ever resolved upon, and it was going to make him wretched, and he found he did not care. The trouble was the aunt. The Dowager Countess of Marle arrived at Harrogate in the second week of a hard January, in a great lumbering travelling coach with 3 servants and 11 trunks, and a determination that had flattened stronger men than her nephew. She was 70, upright as a poker, dressed in unrelieved black bombazine, and she had buried a husband and 2 brothers and a great many of her own hopes, and had distilled the whole of her long life's disappointment into a single fixed purpose, that the line of Calderwood should not die with her nephew Gideon, whom she loved, in her iron way, more than she loved anything, and despaired of accordingly. "You look well," she told him at dinner the first night, in a tone that made it an accusation, "better than you have looked in years. There is colour in your face. Are you in love?" Gideon, who had thought himself proof against surprise, choked on his wine. "I will take that as a yes," said the Dowager comfortably, and speared a piece of pheasant. "Good. It is high time. Who is she? Not one of the Ferrers girls, I hope." The whole family squints. "Tell me at once, and I will find out whether she is suitable, which she almost certainly is not, and then we will make her suitable, which is what money and a title are for." "There is no she," Gideon said, recovering. "There is always a she," said the Dowager. "The only question is whether the man will admit it before he is too old to enjoy it. I admitted mine at 40 and wasted 10 good years first. Do not be a fool as I was, Gideon. You are the last of us. I did not travel 4 days over broken roads at my age to watch you die alone in this great cold barn of a house, because you were too proud or too frightened to reach out your hand." She fixed him with her hard bright eye. "There is someone. I have known you since you were in short coats, and I can read your face like a broadsheet, whatever you imagine. There is someone, and she is unsuitable, or you would have told me. We shall see. I am staying until Easter." Gideon set down his glass with great care and said nothing at all, and the Dowager, watching him, narrowed her eyes, because Gideon saying nothing at all was, to a woman who had known him from the cradle, as good as a written confession, and she resolved on the spot to find out what her nephew was hiding if it took her until Whitsun. She began the next morning, and she began, as such women do, with the servants, because the servants of a great house know everything, and the mistress of the house, if she is clever, knows how to make them tell it. But here the Dowager met an obstacle she had not looked for, which was that the servants of Harrogate questioned about their master's habits. All said the same thing with the same puzzled care, that his Grace had grown very fond of the moors of late, and rode out most mornings, and took with him only the new stable lad, the slight quiet one, Robin Ash. "A stable lad," said the Dowager in her sitting room to her own maid, who had gotten it from the housekeeper, who had gotten it from Coombe. "Yes, my lady. The grooms think it strange, my lady. His Grace never took notice of any of them before. But this one he keeps by him. How old is this lad?" 15 or 16, they think, my lady. Small for his age, keeps to himself. The Dowager sat very still for a moment, and then she said, "Bring me my shawl. I believe I shall take the air. I have a wish to see my nephew's stables." And so it was that on the 3rd morning of her visit, as Gideon and the disguised Eleanor came clattering back into the yard at the end of their ride, wind burned, though neither would have said it, happy, the first thing Gideon saw was his aunt, the Dowager Countess of Marle, standing in the middle of his stable yard in her black bombazine with her hands folded on the head of her cane, watching them come, and watching most particularly the slight figure on the grey pony beside him, with an expression on her old shrewd face that turned Gideon's blood to ice. Because the dowager was 70 and had spent 50 of those years in the sharp, bright, predatory world of the great, where a woman's whole survival depended on reading other people faster and truer than they read her, and she had taken one long look at the stable lad Robin Ash, at the seat in the saddle and the set of the wrists and the throat and the something in the face, and she had known in one heartbeat exactly what her nephew had been too much in love to see clearly and too honourable to say. She had known it faster than Gideon had known it himself. "Well," said the Dowager Countess of Marle, into the sudden silence of the yard, in a voice of great and terrible pleasantness, looking straight up at the frozen face of the boy on the pony. "And who, pray, is this?" Gideon moved his horse forward, putting half between his aunt and the girl, an instinct older than thought. "A groom," he said. "Robin Ash, he came to us in the autumn. A good hand with the horses. Robin, take the horses in, now." But the dowager had already stepped closer, quick for her age, and laid one thin ringed hand on the grey pony's bridle, so that Eleanor could not simply ride away, and she looked up into the girl's face, the walnut stain, the dirt, the cropped hair, the terror, and she smiled, and it was not an unkind smile, though it was a knowing one, and she said low, so that only the three of them could hear it, "Take off your cap, child." Eleanor did not move. The whole yard seemed to hold its breath. Gideon's hand had gone white on his rein. "I said," repeated the dowager, "gently, gently, take off your cap. There is no use in it now. I have buried 3 men and outlived every enemy I ever had, and I promise you I have seen too much of this world to be deceived by a smear of walnut juice and a boy's coat. You are no more a stable lad than I am. Take off your cap and let me look at you." And then her eye slid, very deliberately, to her nephew's rigid face, and something in it softened and sharpened both at once. "Then perhaps someone will tell me what in heaven's name is going on in this house." And Eleanor Vane, cornered at last, 7 weeks of terror rising in her throat, looked once, helplessly, desperately, at the Duke of Calderwood, as though he might yet save her, and Gideon looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw not the master who could destroy her, but something else entirely, something steady and fierce and unmistakably on her side, and she heard him say, very quietly, to his aunt, in a voice that had gone dangerous, "Let her go, aunt. Take your hand off the bridle. Whatever you think you have discovered, you will discover it in the house in private, and you will hold your tongue until then, or you will find that your welcome at Harrogate is a good deal shorter than you had planned." The dowager's eyebrows rose. She looked to her nephew, at the white knuckles, the set jaw, the naked ferocity of a man defending what was his, and something moved across her old face that might, in a softer woman, have been the beginning of a smile. She took her hand from the bridle. "Her," she repeated softly, tasting the word. "You said her, Gideon, not him." She stepped back and folded her hands again upon her cane, and looked from the trembling girl to her transformed nephew, and back again, and her eyes were very bright. "Well," she said, "well, well, well. This is a great deal more interesting than I had dared to hope. Bring her up to the house, nephew, both of you. Now, and do stop looking at me as though I mean to eat her. I have not the least intention of it. I merely intend to find out the truth, and then I rather suspect to help." They brought her up to the house through the servants' passages, so that none should see, and the dowager, for all her sharpness, arranged it with a tact that surprised Gideon, sent her own maid ahead to clear the corridors, chose the small blue sitting room that lay apart from the household's traffic, ordered a fire lit and hot water brought and the door shut, and did it all with the crisp competence of a general, so that within the hour the trembling stable lad had been guided upstairs unseen and stood now in the middle of the warm, bright room, filthy and terrified, in her dead boy's clothes, with a duke and a dowager countess between her and the door. "Now," said the dowager, seating herself and folding her hands, "wash your face, child. There is water and a cloth on the stand. I will not have a conversation of this importance with a girl wearing walnut juice. It is undignified for us both. Go on. We shall none of us look until you say." And when Eleanor, after a long frozen moment, had gone to the stand and dipped the cloth and scrubbed, slowly, the stain and the dirt from her face, and had turned back at last, pale now, white as milk under the grime that remained, her cropped hair sticking up, her grey eyes enormous and rimmed with fear, Gideon looked at her true face for the first time, and it undid him. She was not beautiful in the way the word was used at balls. She was better than that. She had a grave, fine-boned, intelligent face, a wide, clear brow, and a soft, firm mouth, and those grey eyes he already knew. And even ashen with fear and cropped like a filon, there was in the whole of her a quality of quiet gallantry, of a spirit that had been pushed to the very edge and had not broken, that went into Gideon Ravenscar like a sword, and he knew, past all further pretending, that he would move heaven and earth for her, that he had been waiting his whole cold life for exactly this face, without knowing it, and that whatever was coming he would meet it at her side. "There," said the dowager softly, studying her, "that is better. That is a face. Now, your name, your true name, and no more lies. You are past the point where lies will serve you, and I think you are too intelligent not to know it." Eleanor's throat worked. She looked at Gideon, and he gave her the smallest nod. "Trust her," the nod said, "or if you cannot trust her, trust me." And she drew a breath that shook, and lifted her chin in a way that made her, all at once, unmistakably a gentlewoman, and said, in her own voice, low and clear and no longer roughened, a voice that made Gideon close his eyes for one instant at the sound of it, "My name is Eleanor Vane. I was Miss Vane of Thornfield Grange, in the county of—" She named it. "My father was a gentleman. He died in the spring. I am 22 years old, and I have deceived you and your household, your grace, and I am wholly at your mercy, and I ask only that you hear how it came about before you decide what to do with me." "We shall hear all of it," said the dowager, "and you shall sit down while you tell it, for you are swaying on your feet. Gideon, ring for tea." "No, do not argue with me, nephew. The girl needs tea and something to eat. She is half dead with fright, and nothing was ever decided the better for anyone fainting in the middle of it. Sit, child. Sit there by the fire. Now tell us, who died and who did they mean to sell you to?" Eleanor's eyes flew up at that, startled, and the dowager gave a short, dry laugh. "Oh, I was a girl once, whatever you may think to look at me, and I know how these things go. A gentleman dies. There is a fortune, or a little one. There is a guardian who is not the girl's friend. And there is a marriage arranged that the girl would rather die than make, or she would not be here in a dead boy's boots eating her heart out in a duke's stable. I have not lived 70 years for nothing. Am I wrong?" "No," Eleanor whispered. "You are not wrong." And so she told them. She told them all of it, in the warm, bright room with the fire cracking and the tea going cold, and Gideon stood by the window with his back half turned and his jaw like iron and listened to every word, and each word was a fresh coal laid on the slow furnace of his anger. She told them of her father's death, and the will that gave her guardianship into the hands of her uncle Sir Roderick Vane, her father's younger brother, a man of debts and appetites who had never troubled to know her while her father lived. She told them of the discovery, within a month, that her modest fortune was to be the saving of her uncle's ruined estate, not by inheritance, for that was hers, but by marriage, for a husband would control it, and her uncle had found a husband who would pay handsomely for the privilege and share the spoils. She told them of Hollis Crane. She told them plainly, without drama, in a flat, careful voice that was worse than any weeping, of the damp hands and the standing too close, and the two dead wives spoken of like failed livestock, and of the words across her own dinner table. She will answer well enough once the spirit is walked out of her, and Gideon, at the window, made a sound low in his throat, a single sound, quickly stifled, but the dowager heard it and the girl heard it, and Eleanor faltered and glanced at him, and saw the black fury in his still face, and something in her, some frozen thing, thawed the smallest degree, because it was the first time in a year that a soul with power in the world had heard her story and been angry on her behalf. She told them of the marriage settlement drawn up without her consent, the banns to be read, the wedding fixed for the spring. She told them of old Mercy, her nurse, and the dead lad's clothes, and the shears and her mother's hair, and the 3 counties she had come, and the 7 weeks of hiding. And she told it all, and then she stopped, empty, spent, and folded her scarred long hands in her lap and looked at the fire and waited to learn her fate, as she had waited to learn it 100 times in a year, always at the disposal of someone else. There was a silence. The fire spat. And into the silence the Dowager Countess of Marl said, in a voice from which every trace of pleasantry had gone, hard and cold and absolutely certain, "You will not marry Hollis Crane." Eleanor lifted her head. "You will not marry him," the Dowager repeated, "if I have to take you into my own household and stand godmother to your grey hairs. I have known 100 Hollis Cranes in my time and buried the memory of every one with satisfaction. What has been done to you is a wickedness, and it is a wickedness the law will smile upon, because the law was written by men for men, and a girl's whole self is worth less to it than a field or a mill. But I am old, and I am rich, and I am a countess, and I have spent my whole life learning exactly how much a determined woman can do inside the wretched rules they give us, and I promise you, child, it is a great deal more than they think. You will not marry him. There, that is settled. Now the only question," and her sharp eye went, at last deliberately, to her nephew's rigid back at the window, "is by what means we are to prevent it, and I confess I have a notion. But I should like to hear my nephew's first." Gideon turned from the window. He had listened to the whole of it without moving, and the listening had changed something in him past undoing. He had thought when the day began that he loved her. He understood now that he had not yet known what love was, that what he had felt on the moor had been the merest bright surface of it, and that this cold black protective fury, this absolute refusal of the world's arrangement, this readiness to burn down anything and anyone that would harm her, this was the thing itself. And it had been in him all along, buried under 39 years of ice, waiting for someone worth the melting. He crossed the room. He came and stood before her chair, and Eleanor looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them remembered the aunt was in the room at all. "Miss Vane," he said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady. "You came to my house under a false name, because the world you were born to would have handed you, living, to a man who spoke of you as a thing to be broken. You have lived 7 weeks in cold and dirt and terror rather than submit to it. You owe me no apology for the deception. You owe me nothing at all. If anyone in this room owes a debt, it is I, for having a great house full of warm rooms and taking so long to open one of them to you." He drew a breath. "I would ask you to hear one thing, and then I will say no more of it until you are and free and can hear it without any shadow of fear or obligation, for I will not have you feel that your rescue is bought at the price of your heart. But I must say it once, now, or I shall go mad. In the weeks you have lived under my roof I have come to—" He stopped. His jaw worked. He, the coldest man in 3 counties, stood searching for a word like a boy. "I have come to hold you dearer than my life," he said simply, at last. "And whatever comes, whether you ever spare me a second glance or no, I will stand between you and Hollis Crane and your uncle and the whole grinning world if it costs me my title and my lands and my last breath. That is all. That is the whole of it. You need make me no answer. I only wished you to know, before we begin, that you are not alone. You have not been alone since the morning I saw you flinch from the light. I did not know it then. I know it now. The room was very quiet." The Dowager Countess of Marl sat with her hands folded on her cane and her eyes suspiciously bright and, for once in her long life, said absolutely nothing at all, because she was a clever old woman and she knew a moment that must not be interrupted when she saw one. And Eleanor Vane looked up into the face of the Duke of Calderwood, the still dark face gone open and defenceless at last, the fortress thrown wide, and the tears that had not come in a year of terror came now, all at once, not from fear but from its ending. And she pressed her scarred hands to her mouth and wept, and could not answer, and did not need to, because everything that mattered had already been said and heard and understood, in a warm, bright room while the winter howled at the glass outside. There was one evening in that golden sheltered spell that Gideon set apart from all the rest in his memory, and returned to often in the long good years after. It had snowed again softly, and the world beyond the windows was white and hushed. And the 3 of them had dined together in the small warm parlour, rather than the great cold dining hall, for the Dowager had declared the dining hall a barn fit only for freezing dukes to death in, and had commandeered the parlour, and no one had dared argue. and after dinner the old woman had pleaded her years and her rheumatism and gone up early, with a great show of weariness that fooled no one, leaving her nephew and the girl alone by the fire with a frankness so transparent that Eleanor had laughed aloud after the door closed and said, "Your aunt is the least subtle conspirator in England," and Gideon had said, "She believes herself a very Machiavelli," and they had both laughed, and then fallen quiet, alone together in the firelight with the snow falling outside. He had not meant to speak of anything but the ordinary. But the fire was warm, and the snow was soft, and something in the safety of the moment loosened his guarded tongue, and he found himself telling her things he had never told any living soul, of his mother, dead when he was 9, the one warm creature in a cold house, and how the warmth had gone out of the place with her and never come back, of his father, who had taught him that to want a thing was to hand another the power to hurt you, to love a thing was worse, of the long grey defended years in which he had made himself into exactly the man his father had wished, and had woken one morning at 39 to find that he had succeeded, and that the success was a kind of death. He had never said any of it aloud. He said it now low to the fire and to her, and she listened without a word, her grave grey eyes on his face, and when he had finished she did not offer him pity, which he could not have borne, but reached across the small space between their chairs and laid her scarred hand over his and held it, and said only, "You are not that man now. Whatever your father made you, you are not that man now. I have seen the man you are." He stood in a stable-yard and said nothing to keep a stranger safe. "He is a good man, Gideon, and a warm one, and I think he only ever needed someone to be warm toward." And Gideon had looked down at the small hand over his, the hand that had forked straw and gentled a bolting horse and cut off its own mother-coloured hair by candlelight to stay alive, and he had turned his own hand over beneath it so that their palms met. And he had held her hand there in the firelight and not spoken, because his throat had closed, and because he understood that he had just been given freely and unasked the thing his whole cold life had been starved of, to be seen truly and known and not turned from but chosen. The snow fell. The fire burned low. Neither of them moved to mend it or to leave, and it seemed to Gideon, sitting there with her hand in his and the white silence deepening beyond the glass, that if the world would only hold its breath a little longer, if the road would only stay empty one more day and then another, he might at last learn the whole language of happiness, of which he had, until this winter, known not one single word. The world did not hold its breath. He knew it would not. But that one evening it did, and he had it, and no one could ever take it from him. And in the hard hour that came after, the sleet, the coaches, the cold hall, the villain's poisoned threat about her name, it was that evening he held to, the memory of her hand turning warm beneath his, the proof that whatever else was true, she had already chosen to be gentle with him when there was nothing at all to be gained by it, and that a gentleness so freely given might, God willing, be love. They did not solve it that night. Great wrongs are not undone in an evening, and the Dowager Countess of Marle, who had spent a lifetime among the machinery of the powerful, knew better than to move without a plan. Eleanor was given a room, a real room, the first she had slept in for 7 weeks. Small and plain by the standards of the house, but to her a palace, with a bed and a fire and a door that locked from the inside, and Gideon had stood in the corridor while the maid made it ready, and had heard the small click of that lock when at last she was alone behind it. And the sound had done something to him, because he understood what it meant to her, a door she herself could lock, and he had gone to his own room and stood a long time at the window in the dark. The next morning the household was managed with great care. The dowager gave it out, in her carrying voice, that a distant young connection of her own, a Miss Eleanor, a gentleman fallen on hard times, orphaned, whom the Countess had taken under her wing, had arrived to attend her during her stay at Harrogate, and no one questioned it, because who would question a countess? And the slight, quiet stable lad Robin Arsh was simply never seen again, and if Coombe and 1 or 2 of the grooms wondered, they held their tongues, for the wages of wondering aloud about the doings of the great were well known to be dismissal. A gown was found, one of the dowager's own made spare Sunday gowns, taken in overnight, and shoes, and a cap to hide the shorn hair, and when Eleanor came down to the small blue sitting-room the next morning dressed as a woman for the first time since autumn, Gideon, rising to his feet at the sight of her, forgot for a full second how to breathe. She was transformed and she was exactly the same. The grey eyes were the same, and the grave fine mouth, and the quiet gallant carriage he had loved in the boy. But now they were framed in a woman's dress and a woman's grace. And the sight of her was so entirely right, so much the thing he had somehow always been waiting to see, that Gideon had to turn away and busy himself with the fire to master his face. The dowager, watching all of this from her chair with the shameless interest of a woman at a play, said only, "Yes, quite," in a tone of deep satisfaction, and returned to her tea. Over the days that followed, in the strange sheltered pocket of time the three of them had made, Gideon came to know Eleanor Vane as herself, and the knowing only deepened everything. Freed of the disguise, warm and safe for the first time in a year, she came slowly back to life like a plant brought him from frost, and Gideon watched it happen with a wonder that never dulled. She was witty, dryly, quietly witty, in a way that ambushed him and made him laugh aloud, which the household had not heard him do in living memory and which sent the maids into whispering huddles. She was clever, cleverer than he was in some things. She and the dowager took to arguing over the chessboard in the evenings, and the girl won as often as she lost, and the old woman crowed over it like a delighted crone. She was kind. He found out in 100 small ways, the way she thanked the servants, the way she asked after the grey colt with the strained tendon by name, the way she sat with the dowager's rheumatism on the bad cold nights and read to her by the hour in a low true voice. And she was, though she guarded it, coming to feel for him what he felt for her. He was almost sure of it and dared not be certain, because he had sworn to himself he would not press, that her heart must come to him freely and unafraid or not at all. But he saw it in the way her eyes sought him when he entered a room, and the way the colour rose in her newly clean cheeks when their hands brushed passing the chessmen, and the way one evening, when he had spoken lightly of the old cold years before she came, she had looked at him with a sudden fierce tenderness and said, "You will not go back to them. I will not let you," and had gone crimson and looked away, and Gideon had sat very still with his heart going and thought, "She said I will not let you," as though she means to stay, as though there is an us, and had not dared to hope, and had hoped anyway, helplessly, while I breathe. But the world had not forgotten Eleanor Vane, and the world was coming. The first sign was a stranger in the village. The Harrogate steward mentioned it to Gideon in the course of the estate business. A man had been asking questions at the inn, a hard-faced fellow, a thief-taker by the look of him, asking after a young woman who might pass through, showing a miniature, offering coin for word of her. The steward thought nothing of it. Such men came through now and again after runaway servants or debtors. But Gideon's blood ran cold, and he questioned the man closely and pieced it together, a runaway heiress, worth a great deal to those who wanted her back. A determined uncle with debts pressing and a marriage settlement's promised money slipping away with every week she stayed gone. And now, 3 counties on, a professional hired to run her to ground, working the country inn by inn, closing in. He did not tell Eleanor at once. He told the dowager, and the two of them sat up late over it, and the dowager grim laid out the hard truth, that in law Eleanor was not yet of age to be wholly her own mistress, that her uncle was her legal guardian and could compel her return, that a marriage he arranged, however hateful, the law would uphold, and that even a duke could not simply hide a gentleman's ward in his house against the ward's guardian without the thing becoming, sooner or later, a scandal that would ruin the girl's name and give her enemies exactly the weapon they wanted. "The law's against us," the dowager said. "Make no mistake. If Sir Roderick finds her here, and he will find her, for that thief-taker is good at his trade and Harrogate is not so far from his last inquiry as I should like, if he finds her here, an unmarried girl living under your roof with no chaperon, but an old woman and no marriage in sight, he will not need to force her at all. He will merely need to talk. The whisper alone would finish her. And then he will take her home, ruined, with nothing left to bargain with but a hasty wedding to whatever man will still have her, and that man is standing ready, and his name is Crane." She rapped her cane on the floor. "So, we have 3 courses. We can fight the thing in law, slowly, publicly at ruinous cost, and probably lose. We can hide her, flee her further, keep her running, which is no life and only postpones the end." She stopped. "Or," said Gideon. "Or," said the dowager, looking at him steadily, You can put her beyond her uncle's reach entirely, and beyond Hollis Crane's, and beyond the laws, by the one means the law itself provides. For the same wicked rules that give a guardian power over an unmarried girl take that power clean away the moment she is a wife. A married woman is her husband's charge, not her guardian's. Sir Roderick could no more compel Eleanor's marriage to Crane than he could compel mine, if she were already wed to another, and there is no man in England whose wife she could be that Sir Roderick Vane would dare to challenge, save one. You know his name. You see it in your glass every morning. Gideon was silent a long moment. The fire burned low. I will not do it, he said at last, and the dowager's face fell. Until he finished, I will not do it as a stratagem. I will not go to her and say, marry me and be safe, and have her take me out of terror and gratitude and no more, and spend the rest of my life wondering whether she would have chosen me freely. I have seen a marriage made of arrangement and necessity. I grew up in its cold shadow. I would sooner lose her to Crane. No, his jaw tightened. No, that is a lie. I would not sooner lose her to Crane. I would burn the world first. But I will not win her the way Crane would win her, by cornering her where she has no choice. If she is to be my wife, she must want it. She must choose it, freely, knowing she has another way out, and I must give her that other way, a real one, so that her yes, if it comes, is truly a yes and not merely the lesser terror. The dowager looked at her nephew for a long time. Then she reached out and, with a gesture rare in her, laid her thin old hand over his large one on the arm of the chair. You have grown into a better man than your father, she said quietly, and a far better one than I feared you would. Very well. We shall give her a true choice. I shall make her independent. I have money of my own and no hair I care for, and I have long meant to leave it somewhere it would do good. I shall settle enough upon Eleanor Vane, this very week, drawn up airtight by my own lawyers, to make her mistress of her own life, free of her uncle, free of any need to marry any man, ever for bread or safety. And then when she is free, truly free and safe from Crane by law and from want by fortune, then, nephew, and only then you may ask her, and we shall see what she says when there is nothing forcing the answer but her own heart. But even as the dowager spoke, and the plan was made, and Gideon rode into the county town the next morning to set the lawyers working, the world was moving faster than any of them knew. For the hard-faced thief-taker had done his work well. He had traced the runaway heiress to the very gates of Harrogate, and he had sent word by fast rider 3 counties south to the man who had hired him, and Sir Roderick Vane, reading that letter in his cold, decaying hall with his creditors at the door and Hollis Crane's promised money slipping from his grasp, had risen from his chair with an oath and called for his coach and sent a note round to Hollis Crane, and the two of them had set out that same day, northward, hard toward Calderwood, to reclaim what the law called theirs before the meddling Duke could put it beyond them, and to drag Eleanor Vane home to a wedding she would rather have died to escape. In the sheltered days after the reveal, before the world came up the avenue, there was a spell of quiet that Gideon would remember all his life as the sweetest he had ever known, and the strangest, for it was a courtship conducted entirely without either of them daring to call it one. He had sworn he would not press her, and he did not. But a man may keep such a vow and still be present, still be gentle, still find 100 small honourable ways to make a frightened soul feel prized, and Gideon, who had never in his life set himself to please another person, set himself now to it with the whole of his considerable will, and discovered in the doing a happiness he had not known was available to men like him. He gave her the run of the great library, which had stood locked and cold for years, and had a fire lit in it daily, and found her there one afternoon curled in a window seat with a book of his father's she had wept over, and had come and sat a little way off and asked her about it, and they had talked of books until the light failed and the candles had to be brought. And it was the first conversation of pure delight he had had in his adult life, 2 clever minds meeting with nothing to fear from one another. He learned that she read Latin and a little Greek, taught by an indulgent father who had wanted a son and got a daughter and decided, unusually, to educate her anyway, that she played the pianoforte, though there had been no music in her for a year and she was almost afraid to try, that she drew and had a quick sly hand for likenesses, and had once, in the stable, sketched Coombe from memory on the back of a feed bill so exactly that Gideon laughed aloud when she showed him and then grew quiet, thinking of all that quickness and grace shut up for weeks in a dark loft behind a screen of sacking, afraid to be itself. He coaxed the music back into her. That was a labor of some days. He had the great pianoforte in the music room tuned. It had not been touched since his mother's death 30 years before, and he did not ask Eleanor to play, only left the room open and the instrument ready, and mentioned idly that it was a pity so fine a thing stood silent. And one evening, passing the door, he heard a few notes, hesitant, broken off, and the next evening a few more, and on the third evening he came uninvited but not unwelcome, and stood in the shadow of the doorway, and listened to Eleanor Vane play, badly at first, her fingers stiff and out of practice, and then, as the old skill woke and the fear fell away, beautifully, achingly, a sad slow air that filled the cold room and went up into the dark rafters and made the coldest man in 3 counties stand very still in a doorway with his throat aching. When she finished, she turned and saw him and did not startle, and they looked at one another across the candlelit room, and neither said anything, and everything was said. He learned her courage was not only the grand courage of the frost and the flight, but a quiet, daily thing. She would not be waited on. She thanked the servants who had been her fellows a week before and did not blush at them, and they, who might have resented the stable lad turned lady, adored her instead. Because she remembered their names and their troubles and had shared their cold loft and their hard bread and did not pretend otherwise, she went down to the stables as a lady now, in her gown, and stood at the grey colt's shoulder and had his heeled leg trotted out for her, and Coombe, who had never quite known what to make of the strange, quiet Robin Ash, took off his cap to her and said, gruff and red, that the horses had never had a better hand among them, whatever else was true, and Eleanor had thanked him with tears standing in her eyes, and Gideon, watching, had had to look away, and he learned, slowly, wonderingly, that she was coming to love him. He had not let himself count on it. He had schooled himself to expect gratitude and no more, and to be content with gratitude, and to want nothing that was not freely given. But he could not blind himself to it forever, to the way she brightened when he came into a room, to the ease that had grown between them, to the evening the dowager had teased him about his old coldness, and Eleanor had said, quick and warm before she thought, he is not cold. You none of you ever looked at him properly, and had gone scarlet and stared at the fire, and the dowager had exchanged a long private glance with her own teacup. He learned it, and he held the learning close, and he did not speak of it, for he had made his vow. Her heart, if it came to him, must come free and unafraid, and while the shadow of Crane still hung over her, she was not yet free, and he would not take advantage of a gratitude or a fear or a nearness that a safer woman might not feel. So he waited and loved her in silence, and was, in the waiting, happier than he had ever been, and dreaded every day the sound of wheels on the avenue. The dowager watched all of it with the deep satisfaction of an old campaigner whose long strategy is coming right, and said little and did much. She took Eleanor under her wing in earnest, taught her, in their long evenings, the 1,000 small hard rules of the world she would have to move in, not to change the girl who needed no changing, but to arm her, told her the histories and the alliances and the enmities of the great families, showed her, without ever quite saying so, how a clever woman survives and even prevails in a world built to use her. They will say you married him for his fortune, the old woman said once, bluntly over the chessboard. When you are his duchess, they will say it in every drawing-room in the kingdom, that the Duke of Calderwood married a penniless nobody, and they will look for the calculation in you and find none and hate you for it. You must not mind them. The only people whose opinion of a marriage matters are the 2 people in it. I learned that too late, learn it early. And Eleanor had looked up from the board and said quietly, I am not marrying him for his fortune, my lady. I am not sure I am marrying him at all. He has not asked me, and I do not know that he will. And the dowager had smiled her dry old smile and moved her bishop and said, he will ask you, child, the moment he is sure your yes will be free. He is a fool about it, but an honourable fool, which is the best kind of fool a woman can hope to marry. He is waiting to be certain he is not taking advantage of you. Give him some sign, or the pair of you will wait for one another until you are both my age. and Eleanor had blushed and lost the game badly, and the old woman had crowed. Gideon did not know these conversations happened. He knew only that the days were golden and the nights were haunted, that he loved her past all his old defences, and that somewhere south of them a road ran up toward Harrogate, and that he could not make it safe until the lawyers finished their slow work and the dowager's fortune sealed Eleanor's freedom past all touching. He drove the lawyers hard. He rode into the county town himself twice to press them. He did everything a man could do, and it was not fast enough, and he knew it was not fast enough, and the not fast enough of it sat in him like a stone through the last golden days, so that even in his happiness he found himself listening, always, under everything, for the sound of wheels. And then on a grey afternoon with sleet driving across the moor, the wheels came. They came on a grey afternoon 4 days later, with sleet driving across the moor, 2 travelling coaches labouring up the long avenue toward Harrogate, and Gideon, standing at his study window, saw them come and knew, before any servant announced it, exactly who they were. He had not yet asked her. That was the bitterness of it. The lawyer's work took time. The settlement that would make Eleanor free was drawn, but not yet signed and sealed. The dowager had ridden that very morning to the town to complete it, and was not expected back before dark. And so the plan that would have set Eleanor beyond all reach lay 4 hours from finished, and the danger was at the door now, this hour, this minute, sleet and all. He found her in the small blue sitting room with a book, and she looked up at his face and knew at once, for she had learned to read him as he had learned to read her. "They have come," she said, "not a question." She had gone very white, but she did not tremble, and Gideon loved her the more for it, for the steadiness that fear could no longer break. "Your uncle," he said, "and I think the other. 2 coaches. They will be at the door within the quarter hour." He crossed to her and took her cold hands in his. "Eleanor, listen to me. You are safe. Do you hear me? Whatever they say, however the law reads, you are safe in this house, and no one leaves it against their will while I draw breath. But I must ask you to trust me, and to do exactly as I say for the next hour, and it may be hard, and you must be braver than you have ever been. Can you?" She looked up at him, and her fingers tightened on his, and she said, "I have been Robin Ash for 7 weeks in a duke's stable. I can be brave for an hour." And Gideon, absurdly in the teeth of everything, wanted to laugh, and to kiss her, and did neither, and only pressed her hands and let them go. He arranged it swiftly. He sent Eleanor upstairs, not to hide, for he would not have her hide again in her own defence, but to wait out of sight within call, with the door and its blessed inner lock, and with 2 of his largest footmen posted in the corridor with orders that no one passed them without his word. He sent a rider hard after the dowager to bring her back at the gallop with the lawyer's papers, signed or unsigned. And then he went down to his great cold hall, and stood before the fire with his hands behind his back and his face composed into the stony mask 3 counties feared, and waited for the men who had come to take her. They were shown in dripping and blustering, and Gideon marked them both in a single sweep. Sir Roderick Vane was a lean grey greedy man with his niece's colouring and none of her soul, a man gone to seed and to debt, with the hunted furtive anger of one whose whole scheme is coming apart. And Hollis Crane. Gideon looked at Hollis Crane, at the heavy, damp-handed bulk of him, the small wet eyes, the coarse, triumphant set of his mouth, and understood in one glance everything Eleanor had told him, and felt the slow furnace in his chest bank up white-hot, and kept his face like stone. "Your Grace." Sir Roderick made a bow that was half a demand. "Forgive the intrusion and the state of us. We have come far and fast on an urgent family matter, and I will not waste your Grace's time. I have reason to believe, I have certain knowledge, that my ward, my late brother's daughter, a young woman named Eleanor Vane, is at present within these walls. She fled her home some weeks past, in a fit of girlish folly, and has, I am given to understand, been sheltering here under some false character. I have come to take her home. She is my lawful ward, I am within my rights. I ask only that your Grace produce her, and we shall trouble you no further." "Girlish folly," Gideon repeated. His voice was very quiet, and quiet from him was a thing that made wiser men than Sir Roderick go still. "You have ridden 4 days through sleet after a fit of girlish folly. You must value the girl very highly." "She is my ward," said Sir Roderick, colouring. "Her conduct reflects upon my house, and she is affianced to this gentleman, Mr. Crane, The wedding is fixed. Her flight has caused him grievous inconvenience and put a stain upon her name that only her prompt return and marriage can. Mr. Crane, said Gideon, turning the full weight of his still dark gaze upon the heavy man, spoke, I am told, at Miss Vane's own dinner table, of walking the spirit out of her, as one might break a horse. Do I have that correctly, sir? Did you say those words? The room went silent. Hollis Crane's small eyes flickered, and his damp mouth opened and shut, and he said, blustering, a man may, a figure of speech, a spirited girl wants managing, your grace knows how it is. I do not know how it is, said Gideon, and now he took one step forward, and something in the movement, in the leashed enormous stillness of the man, made both his visitors fall back a pace without meaning to. I do not know how it is, Mr. Crane, because I am not in the habit of speaking of women, or of any living creature that has done me no harm, as things to be broken. I find I have a very great objection to it. I find, indeed, that I have conceived in the last few minutes so profound an objection to you, sir, and to everything you are, that I am obliged to muster myself with some care, and you would be wise not to try that mastery further. Your grace forgets himself, Sir Roderick began hotly. The law. Ah, said Gideon, the law. Yes, let us speak of the law, Sir Roderick, since you are so fond of it. You are Eleanor Vane's guardian. That is true, and true until she comes of age or marries. You may in law compel her return to your house. That too is true, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. But hear me now, and hear me well, for I am about to tell you exactly what will happen if you attempt it. He came another step closer and dropped his voice further, so that the two men had to strain to hear the ruin he was promising them. If you take that girl out of this house against her will, I will make it the whole business of my life to destroy you both. I have more money than you can conceive of, Sir Roderick, and more time, and a very great deal more patience, and I have never in my life wanted to use them for anything until now. I will buy up every debt you owe, and I know already, for I have had 4 days' warning and have not been idle, precisely how much you owe, and to whom, and I will call them all in on the same morning, and I will have you in a debtor's cell by summer. And you, Mr. Crane, he turned. You have buried 2 wives. I have already set men to inquire, most particularly, into how they died, and what was said in the villages, and whether the inquiries made at the time were as thorough as they might have been. I do not yet know what they will find. But I promise you, sir, that I will spend whatever it costs to find out, and to make public every word of it, and we shall see how eager the next father is to give his daughter to a man whose first 2 wives are so very carefully spoken of. He let that sit. That is the law, gentlemen. Your law and mine both. You may compel the girl, and I may ruin you, and I give you my word as a peer of this realm that if you do the first, I will do the second, to the last farthing and the last breath in my body. Choose. Sir Roderick had gone from grey to white to a mottled purple, and Hollis Crane was sweating in the cold hall, and for a moment Gideon thought the naked threat had done it, that they would turn and go, and that he would have bought Eleanor the hours she needed with nothing but his fury and his purse. But desperation makes men reckless, and Sir Roderick Vane was a desperate man with creditors at his own door and no other card to play, and greed and terror together drove him past sense. You may threaten as you please, he spat, but you cannot keep a man from his lawful ward, and I will have the magistrate, and I will have the county sheriff, and I will have every door in this house open to me, and if you obstruct the law, duke or no duke, it will be you in the wrong before the whole world, and it is the girl who will pay for it, in her name and her ruin, for reflect, your grace, upon how it will look, an unmarried girl, hidden weeks in your house. What will they say she was to you? What will they call her? You may save her from me and damn her forever in the saying, and then, when I take her home ruined, no man on earth will have her but the one man who still will, and he is standing beside me. So, you have your law, and I have mine, and mine is the older and the stronger, and I say produce Eleanor Vane. And it was true, and Gideon knew it was true, and the knowing of it was the coldest moment of that whole cold day, that the villain had found the one weapon that his money and his fury could not turn aside, which was the reputation of the woman he loved, and that in fighting to keep her he might be the very hand that ruined her, and that there was no answer to it, no answer at all. but the one answer he had sworn he would not use because it took her choice away. And then, into that frozen deadlock, a clear, low, steady voice spoke from the doorway. "He need not produce me, uncle," said Eleanor Vane. "I am here." They all turned. She stood in the doorway of the great hall in her borrowed gown, small and pale, her cropped hair hidden under a cap, her chin up and her grey eyes level, and she had come down against all his orders, and Gideon's heart lurched with fear and with a wild sudden pride both at once. She did not look at her uncle nor at Crane, whose damp face had lit with an ugly triumph. She looked only at Gideon, across the whole length of the cold hall, and she held his eyes, and something passed between them, some question and its answer, and she turned back to her uncle with a calm that silenced the room. "You say I will be ruined," she said, "hidden weeks in a duke's house, and that no man will have me after, and that therefore I must go home with you and marry Mr. Crane, whom I would not marry to save my life. For I did try to save my life, uncle, these 7 weeks, and I found I would rather have died in a ditch than let him lay one finger on me. And I mean it now as I meant it then. You say my only escape from ruin is that marriage, but you are wrong. There is another." She lifted her chin higher, and her voice did not shake, though Gideon could see what it cost her. "There is another, and it is this, that I am not, in fact, an unmarried girl hidden in a stranger's house. I am the betrothed of the Duke of Calderwood, freely and by my own choice, and have been these several days. And there is no ruin in a woman sheltering under the roof of the man she is shortly to wed." She turned at last to Gideon, and all her courage was in her face and all her fear, and under both a thing that was neither, that was the truest thing in the room. "If," she said, very low, only to him, though the whole hall heard it, "if he will still have me." For the space of one heartbeat the great hall of Harrogate held perfectly still, sleet ticking at the tall windows, the fire hissing, and Gideon Ravenscroft stood looking at the woman across the room who had just, in front of her enemies, offered him her whole life, and offered it as a shield to save herself, and yet not only as a shield, for he had seen her eyes, and he knew, at last and past all his careful refusals to hope, that the thing she had done in desperation was also the thing she wanted, that the two were one, that her yes was real. And every scruple he had held so fiercely, that she must choose freely, unpressed, with another way out, fell away not because he abandoned it, but because he saw in a flash that it was already answered. She had another way out. The dowager's fortune was even now being signed into her name. She did not yet know it, but the road to freedom without him was open, and would be open still tomorrow, and he could tell her of it the moment these men were gone, and she could unmake this betrothal at her leisure with no shame and no cost. She had chosen him not knowing she had a choice, but he would give her the choice after, freely, and if she chose again the same, then it was as free a choice as any woman ever made, and he would trust it. For now, this moment, she had reached out her hand to him across the cold hall, and he had sworn on the morning he first saw her flinch that he would take it, and he took it. He crossed the hall. He did not hurry. He would not give her uncle the satisfaction of seeing him hurry. He came to her slowly and with the whole weight of his rank and his certainty, and he took her cold hand in both of his large warm ones, there before them all, and he raised it to his lips, and then he turned, keeping her hand in his, and faced the tomb by the fire. "Yes," he said, "I will still have her. I have wished for nothing else since before I knew her name." He looked at Sir Roderick, and the stone was gone from his face now, and something far more dangerous had come into it, a settled joy that made him look for the first time like a man there was no fighting. "You hear it, Sir Roderick. Miss Vane and I are betrothed of her own free will before witnesses, my aunt the Countess of Marle among them, who has known of it these several days and will swear to it before any magistrate you care to summon. Your guardianship over an affianced woman is a shadow of a thing, and it ends altogether, as you know, on the day of the marriage, which—" He glanced down at Eleanor, and something passed between them, and she gave the smallest nod, "which will be within the week by special license. In the chapel of this house. You have no ward to reclaim, sir. You have a niece who is about to become the Duchess of Calderwood, and who will, I promise you, remember all her life which of her family stood by her and which sold her, and who will have, as my wife, the means and the memory to see that the account is settled." Sir Roderick's mouth opened and closed. The whole ground had gone from under him. A duke he might have fought in law over an unmarried ward, slowly, at ruinous cost. A betrothed woman witnessed by a countess he could not touch at all, and a duchess, once she was made, was beyond his reach forever, and would be, moreover, a very rich and very powerful enemy who knew exactly what he had done. He saw his creditors and the debtors sell, and Crane's promised money gone, and his last card turned face up and worthless, and he made one final desperate cast. "She is lying," he said hoarsely. "This betrothal, it is a fiction, cooked up this last hour to cheat me. There is no license. You cannot marry within the week. The banns A special license dispenses with the banns," said Gideon pleasantly. "As a peer I may procure one within the day, and I have, in fact, already sent for it. It should reach us tomorrow. My aunt returns this evening with my lawyers and the papers of a marriage settlement already drawn. You are 4 hours too late, Sir Roderick, and 4 days too greedy. And I would suggest that you and your companion take your 2 coaches and your figures of speech about breaking spirited creatures, and remove yourselves from my house and my county before I recall that I offered you a choice. And reflect that I did not much like either of you well enough to keep offering it. It was Hollis Crane in the end who broke first, Hollis Crane, who had come north for a fortune and a broken girl and had found instead a duke who had been inquiring into his dead wives and who now saw, past all the legal wrangling, only that the money was gone, and that this terrible cold nobleman meant every word about the villages and the questions and the making public. He plucked at Sir Roderick's sleeve, muttering, his damp face grey now, wanting only to be gone, to be far from Calderwood and its master and its inquiries before they bore fruit. And Sir Roderick, seeing his last ally turn to flee, seeing the whole edifice of his scheme in rubble, gave one last venomous look at the niece who had escaped him, and turned on his heel. And the 2 of them went out of the great hall into the sleet without another word, and the tall doors boomed shut behind them, and it was over. It was over. Gideon stood holding Eleanor's hand in the sudden ringing quiet, and for a moment neither of them moved, hardly daring to believe it, listening to the wheels of the 2 coaches grind away down the avenue and fade into the storm. Then Eleanor made a small broken sound and swayed. The courage that had held her upright through the whole of it going all at once, and Gideon caught her, and she turned her face into his shoulder and shook, not weeping, past weeping, simply shaking with the release of a year of terror. And he held her there in the cold hall before the fire and said her name over and over, low into her shorn hair, "Eleanor, Eleanor, you are safe, it is done, you are safe," and felt her slowly, slowly still. The Dowager Countess of Marle returned at dusk, in a fury of jolting wheels and a flurry of lawyers, having ridden through the sleet like a woman half her age, the settlement papers clutched in her reticule, only to find the crisis met and the enemy routed and her nephew and the girl sitting together by the hall fire, very close, saying little. The girl's hand in the Duke's. She took it all in with one sweeping look, and she rapped her cane on the flags, and she said, "Well, I ride myself to a jelly over broken roads to save the day, and I find the day quite saved without me." I am not certain whether to be gratified or affronted, but her old eyes were bright, and when Gideon rose to tell her all of it, she waved him down and went instead to Eleanor and took the girl's face in her 2 thin hands and looked at her a long moment and said gruffly, "You did well, child. You did very well. I should have been proud to have you for a daughter, and I mean to have you for a niece, which is nearly as good and involves rather less obligation." And Eleanor, laughing and crying at once, had risen and embraced the fierce old woman, who bore it with enormous dignity and did not, anyone could see, mind it in the least. That evening, when the household was quiet and the dowager had retired in triumph and the storm had blown itself out into a clear, cold, starry night, Gideon found Eleanor alone in the small blue sitting room, standing at the window looking out at the moon on the moor, and he came and stood beside her, and for a time they said nothing, easy in the full companionable silence they had first found on horseback in that other life. Then he said, quietly, "There is a thing I must tell you, and it may change everything, and I would rather tell you tonight than have you learn it later and think I hid it." And he told her of the dowager's settlement, that even now the papers lay signed in his aunt's reticule, that a fortune had been made over into her sole name, that Eleanor Vane was As of this day, an independent woman of means, free of her uncle, free of all need to marry anyone at all, for bread or safety or protection, ever again. You are free, he said, truly free and rich and beholden to no one. The betrothal you claimed today in the hall, you claimed it to save yourself, and it did save you, and I will bless the words all my life, but it need bind you to nothing. If you wish it unmade, it shall be unmade tomorrow, quietly, with no shame and no cost. You may go where you please and live as you please and never see this house again, and my aunt's fortune goes with you whatever you decide, for she has made it yours outright and irrevocably. I will not have you my wife because you were cornered, so I give you the choice again now, when nothing forces it, and whatever you choose I will honor, and I will count myself blessed to have known you either way. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, looking not at the moon now but at him, and Gideon made himself stand still and bear it, though was the hardest waiting of his life. You are, she said at last softly, a very foolish man for all your reputation. And when he looked at her, startled, she went on, her voice not quite steady, her grey eyes shining in the moonlight. You saw me flinch in your stable and said nothing. You knew what I was for weeks and let me keep my secret and my safety both. You rode the moor with me and made me laugh when I had forgotten how. You stood in your hall today and threatened to burn down the world for a woman who had told you nothing but lies. And now, when I have offered you my whole heart, cornered or not, you give me the fortune and the freedom to walk away from you, and you tell me to choose again, as though I could look at all of that, at all of you, and choose anything but this. She turned fully to him and put her free hand flat against his chest, over the heart that had been frozen 39 years and was frozen no longer. I am not marrying you to be safe, Gideon. I was safe the moment you turned and walked away from the frost that first morning. I only did not know it yet. I am marrying you because somewhere on that cold moor, between one silence and the next, I came to love you more than I have ever loved anything, and because I would rather be poor and free at your side than rich and free anywhere else on this earth. That is my choice, freely made now, when nothing forces it. And I should like to hear you say you will still have me, one more time with no one watching but the moon. And the Duke of Calderwood, who had come down to his stable one winter morning to look at a horse and found instead the whole of the rest of his life, took her face in his hands as gently as though she were made of the frostlight itself, and said, I will have you, Eleanor Vane, now and always. I have been having you in my heart since the morning you flinched from the light, and I will go on having you there until the light goes out. And he kissed her, at last softly in the moonlight, in the warm quiet room, and outside the moor lay silver, and still under the stars. And the long cold winter of his life was over. They were married 4 days later in the small stone chapel of Harrogate, by special license, with the Dowager Countess of Marle standing up as witness in her best black bombazine and weeping quite openly and denying it fiercely afterward. Eleanor wore her mother's colour, for by then her own hair had begun to grow again, and the household, who had loved the strange, quiet stable lad, and were half mad with delight to find him a bride and their master's own duchess, filled the little chapel and the yard beyond it. And old Coombe the head groom wept into his cap, and the grey colt with the healed tendon was led out garlanded, and Samson the great cart horse, who had once bolted across the frost, stood placid in the yard, while the bells rang. Old Mercy came, brought north at Gideon's expense in a comfortable coach, and held her girl and could not speak, and the more flowers Eleanor had named on that first ride came up in the spring around the chapel wall, and the words above its worn old lintel, that she had once read aloud without thinking and gone rigid with fear at the reading, she read aloud again on her wedding morning without any fear at all, her husband's hand warm in hers, dum spiro spero. While I breathe, I hope. They lived long, and they lived well, and the great cold house that had frozen a boy and buried a man became, under Eleanor, a warm and living place, full of horses and light and, in time, of children who rode almost before they could walk, taught by a mother whose hands had never forgotten. And on winter mornings, sometimes the Duke of Calderwood would walk down to his stables before breakfast, and stand in the wide doorway with the light behind him, and remember a slight brave figure who had once flinched from exactly that light and turned his whole life over in the flinching. And his wife, if she found him there, would come and stand beside him in the doorway with her hand in his, and they would watch the steam rise off the warm flanks of the horses in the cold, and say nothing at all, easy in the full deep silence they had loved each other into first. All those years ago, when she was a stranger in boy's boots and he was a man who had forgotten how to hope, and neither of them yet knew that the morning he saw her was the morning they passed, came home.